William the Conqueror. Born in 1028 as William of Normandy, earned his namesake for his successful invasion of England in the year 1066. After laying a claim for the English throne, William led his Norman forces to the victory at the Battle of Hastings, effectively changing the course of English history forever. His was a reign that introduced Norman culture and governance to England, leading to significant changes in language, architecture, and administration of the country. If you want to learn about William, you're in the right place. Hello and welcome to the channel. If you are new here, it's good to meet you, and if you're coming back, it is great to see you again. As always, if you like what I do and you want to support the channel, link to the Patreon is in the description. Otherwise, tell YouTube that you want more people to see it by liking, subscribing, and leaving your thoughts down below in the comments. Now, I'd like you to get yourself comfortable as we begin our full biography of William the Conqueror. William was born around the end of 1028 in Falaise, the duchy of Normandy. He was the illegitimate son of Robert I, the Duke of Normandy, and his mother was Herleva, the daughter of Fulbert of Falaise, who may have worked as a tanner or perhaps an embalmer. Herleva was not married to Robert I, and later married Herluin of Conteville, with whom she had more children, including Odo of Bayeux and Count Robert of Mortain. Robert I succeeded his brother Richard III as Duke of Normandy on the 6th of August 1027, under contentious circumstances. Richard's sudden death led to suspicions of foul play that were solely directed at Robert. However, no one could really find any conclusive evidence. The political atmosphere in Normandy during this period was in a state of almost chaos, with ongoing strife within the duchy and against external threats such as Alan III of Brittany. By the year 1031, Duke Robert had consolidated considerable support from the Norman nobility, critical in shaping the future of William. Supporters included his uncle, the Archbishop of Rouen, and other notable figures like Gilbert of Brion. Robert I was a supporter of the exiled English princes, being Edward and Alfred, promoting connections between Normandy and England. There is a speculation that exists about Robert's brief engagement to a daughter of King Canute of England. However, no marriage occurred, and it is unclear how such a union might have affected William's succession. But nevertheless, William frequently appeared alongside his father in official documents, suggesting his recognition as the potential heir. In 1034, against the advice of his council, Robert embarked on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Before his departure, he held a council in January of 1035, where he secured an oath of fealty to William from the Norman magnates, affirming William as his successor. Robert then died in the July of the following year, 1035, in Nicaea during his journey home from Jerusalem. Nicaea is a kind of halfway point between Jerusalem and Constantinople, kind of near Anatolia. Well, this left William to inherit the ducal throne, under the protection and influence of his extended family and Robert's most loyal supporters. Upon his father's death in 1035, William inherited the entire duchy of Normandy, but his path to power was not an easy one, fraught with challenges due to his illegitimate birth and also his young age. Evidently, he was only 7 or perhaps 8 years old at the time, certainly raising a lot of eyebrows among the people who he was going to be responsible for making decisions for. His early reign was supported by significant figures, including his great-uncle, Archbishop Robert, and King Henry I of France. This backing was crucial for maintaining the ducal policies initiated by his father, such as supporting the exiled English princes in 1036. However, Archbishop Robert's death in the March of 1037 precipitated a crisis, plunging Normandy into a period of anarchy that persisted for 10 long years, all the way into 1047. It was during this time William's guardianship changed hands several times due to the rather violent deaths of his protectors, including Alan of Brittany, Gilbert of Brionne, and Turchitil. Even Osberne, another guardian, was murdered in William's own chamber. Well, these events just show the instability and danger of William's early rule, with his maternal uncle Walter at times having to conceal him among peasants to ensure his safety, a narrative which is admittedly possibly embellished by the chronicler Orderic Vitalis. William was reportedly raised alongside cousins, who later played pivotal roles in his reign, such as William Fitzosborne, Roger de Beaumont, and Roger of Montgomery. Despite these private wars and feuds among the Norman nobility, the ducal government maintained some semblance of control, with the backing of ecclesiastical hierarchy and continued support from Henry I. The rebellion in late 1046, led by Guy of Burgundy and supported by several Norman viscounts, marked a significant threat to William's rule. Fleeing an attempt on his life in Valognes, William sought refuge with King Henry. Together, in the early months of 1047, they returned to Normandy and achieved a crucial victory at the Battle of Valais-Dunes near Caen. This battle, while very important, was not solely won by William's efforts alone. King Henry's contribution was also significant. Regardless, following the victory, William firmly established his rule over Normandy and promoted the Truce of God, aiming to reduce warfare by limiting the days when fighting was allowed. This Battle of Valais-Dunes was a turning point, yet William's consolidation of power involved nearly continuous warfare from the years 1047 to 1054, and the challenges just kept coming, especially from the nobility, and they didn't stop hassling him until around 1060. After his father's death, though, William, still a child, succeeded to the duchy, and of course all of these troubles plagued him throughout his youth, though he did garner enough key support that was crucial for stabilizing his early reign. But this support did not help him maintain all of his father's policies, including support for the exiled princes in full. Of course, all of this was among a very destabilized Normandy. Not good for a young lad of 8 years old. Well, William's minority was marked by this series of never-ending guardianships, each ending in equal amounts of violence and betrayal. His survival and eventual rise to power were aided by the support of these remaining loyalists, but also his mother's family, including the Uncle Walter who protected him during the most perilous times. Now, throughout the 1050s, William faced ongoing conflicts with these neighboring nobles, and let's talk about them in detail. We have names like Geoffrey Martel of Anjou, and even King Henry, who oscillated between support and opposition. The strategic marriage to Matilda of Flanders in the early 1050s, despite initial papal resistance, significantly enhanced his political stature and linked him to one of the most influential French territories. Despite lacking authentic portraits and having only conventional representations on things like the Bayeux Tapestry, historical depictions do suggest that William was quite robust and burly, with great physical strength and stamina, traits that suited his reputation as a formidable fighter, but also a skilled horseman. Of course, tough guys like William, their health remained fairly excellent until later life, although apparently he had become noticeably heavier. Retirement hits pretty hard. Now, when it comes to William's intellectual pursuits, they're admittedly less documented, with indications that he did try to learn Old English later in life, but he soon abandoned the efforts due to time constraints. At least, that was his excuse. No one ever has the time, right? His main interest actually lay in hunting, a pastime that he frequently enjoyed. William's personal life, particularly his marriage to Matilda, was notably stable and apparently quite affectionate, an exception in the context of medieval royalty, where extramarital affairs were surprisingly common. His governance in Normandy involved a mobile court with which he travelled across the duchy to oversee administrative functions directly, a very hands-on approach. This system relied heavily on revenues from ducal lands, tolls, and taxes collected by his household's chambers. Unlike many of his contemporaries, William maintained a close and cooperative relationship with the church, involving himself in ecclesiastical appointments and church councils. This alliance was fortified through strategic appointments, such as his half-brother Odo as the Bishop of Bayeux, and his support for monastic expansions, highlighted by his founding of new monastic houses in Caen. In 1051, King Edward of England, who was childless, apparently designated William of Normandy as his successor, due to their familial connections through Edward's maternal uncle, Richard II of Normandy. William's potential succession was even recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, suggesting that he may have visited England to secure his claim, although his visit during this period is debated due to these ongoing conflicts in Normandy. So, basically, this succession comes back to King Edward's claim, who had chosen King William to take over the throne once he was gone. Now the relationship between King Edward and Earl Godwin of Wessex, a dominant figure in England, was strained despite Godwin's initial support for Edward's kingship. The tension escalated in 1051, leading to Godwin's temporary exile. During this absence, Edward extended the offer of William to the throne, a move coinciding with Godwin's return in 1052, which reinstated him and his family's power. Notably, no English sources, at least the ones that we've found, corroborate the Norman accounts of an official embassy sent by the Archbishop Robert of Canterbury to William about the succession. William's claim to Maine in 1062 following Count Herbert II's death also shows his strategy during this period. His marriage to Herbert's sister linked him by marriage to Maine, allowing him to assert control after invading in 1064. Meanwhile, William's interactions with neighboring regions like Brittany and Anjou, through military campaigns and diplomatic engagements, further solidified his power in Normandy and prepared him for larger conquests, including the eventual invasion of England. And back in England, the political landscape was also evolving, with the deaths of key figures like Earl Godwin and the coming of Edward the Exile, a potential rival for the English throne. The political dynamic also continued to shift, particularly with the revolt against Tostig, Godwin's son, in Northumbria in 1065, which led Harold Godwinson's increasing prominence as a candidate for the throne after King Edward's death in the January of 1066. This succession crisis culminated with Harold's coronation, despite previous claims and promises that linked William to the English throne. Thus, Harold Godwinson was crowned on January the 6th, 1066, in the recently completed Westminster Abbey, built under Edward the Confessor in the Norman architectural style. Yes, Westminster is indeed that old. While the identity of the one who performed the coronation is still disputed, English sources suggest it was Ealdred, Archbishop of York, while Norman sources claim it was Stigand, whose position as Archbishop was considered illegitimate by the papacy. This moment marked the beginning of Harold's reign, amidst all the challenges due to various contenders to the throne, including his own exiled brother, Tostig, and foreign claimants like Harald Hardrada of Norway, and of course, our friend William of Normandy. Now Tostig Godwinson, Harold's brother, launched minor raids along England's southern coast in the May of 1066, with a fleet provided by Baldwin of Flanders. His efforts, however, garnered very little support, and after unsuccessful attempts in Lincolnshire and near the Humber River, he retreated back to Scotland. During this period, William of Normandy reportedly sent an embassy to remind Harold of an earlier oath to support William's claim, though the veracity and details of this embassy are also debated to this day. Harold, therefore, decided to provide defences by assembling an army and a fleet along the English Channel, anticipating William's impending invasion. William then held a council to discuss the plans for the invasion, as recounted by William of Poitiers. Though Portiers portrayed this as a debate among William's nobles, it is likely that there was very little real opposition, given William's established control over them. Portiers also notes that William secured a papal banner and support of Pope Alexander II, claims that are corroborated to some extent by later events, and of course penance performed by William, suggesting post-conquest papal approval. Over the summer, William amassed a significant invasion force in Normandy, comprising not only Normans, but also mercenaries and volunteers from across northern France, Brittany, and the region of Flanders. The fleet, readied by early August, was unfortunately delayed by adverse winds until late September. This delay, however, was good news for Harold, as it allowed him to disperse his forces with the end of the threat season, only to reassemble them upon learning of the new threat from the north. Tostig and Harold Hardrada invaded Northumbria in the September of 1066, quickly defeating local forces at the Battle of Fulford near York. Harold Godwinson responded by marching north from London and decisively defeating and killing both Tostig and Hardrada at the Battle of Stamford Bridge on September 25th. This victory, however, left Harold's forces depleted and needing to march south again to meet with William's impending invasion. Meanwhile, William's fleet set sail from Saint-Valery-sur-Somme 2 days after Stamford Bridge, landing at Pevensey Bay on September the 28th. William then moved to Hastings, establishing a fortified base and awaiting Harold's return, all while harrying the surrounding countryside to try to provoke and draw Harold into an open battle. This strategic positioning set the stage for the pivotal confrontation at Hastings. Well, after his victory over Harold Hardrada and Tostig at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, Godwinson faced the other immediate threat. William was coming. Leaving a significant portion of his forces in the north, Harold quickly marched south with the remainder of his army to confront William. He likely learned of William's landing while on the journey. Harold briefly stopped in London to gather more forces, spending about a week there before heading to Hastings. His journey south from York to London was naturally in quite a rush, reportedly covering approximately 200 miles at an average pace of around 27 miles per day. Upon reaching the vicinity of Hastings, Harold established his forces on the Senlac Hill, a defensive position that provided a strategic advantage over the approaching Normans. The Battle of Hastings commenced on the morning of October the 14th, 1066, and lasted the entire day. The English forces, composed primarily of infantry, formed a shield wall along the ridge. Good old shield wall, nothing beats that. If you want a full account of the Battle of Hastings, I made an hour-long video on that as well. Now initially, this formation successfully repelled the Norman attacks and inflicted heavy casualties. However, as we all know, the tide of battle turned when some of William's Breton troops feigned a retreat drawing parts of the English forces into a pursuit and exposing them to a devastating counterattack by Norman cavalry. The battle's outcome was ultimately decided, though, by the death of Harold, circumstances of which remain a subject of debate, though it is widely believed, based on the accounts like that of William of Jumièges and the iconic image in the Bayeux tapestry, that Harold was killed by an arrow that struck him to the eye, although other sources suggest different causes. In the aftermath of battle, Harold's body was identified either through his armor or recognizable marks on his body. Despite an offer from Harold's mother to ransom her son's body with its weight in gold, William refused and reportedly ordered that Harold's body be thrown into the sea. However, once again, this might just be a fable, and there were later claims by Waltham Abbey that Harold was secretly buried there. Once again, we don't know for sure. Well, what happened after Hastings? Well, following his victory, William expected a swift surrender from the English leadership, but this was not the case. The English nobility and clergy, though somewhat half-heartedly, nominated Edgar the Atheling as king. William then secured strategic locations in southern England, including Dover and Canterbury, and captured Winchester, which housed the royal treasury. His march towards London involved a wide encircling movement, coming from the south and the west, and culminated with the construction of a castle in London to consolidate his control. Finally, William crossed the Thames at Wallingford, where he received the submission of key English figures like Archbishop Stigand and Edgar the Atheling himself. William was then crowned King of England on Christmas Day 1077 at Westminster Abbey, marking the beginning of Norman rule in England. This swift and strategic series of actions following the Battle of Hastings showed William's effective leadership and marked the transition of power from Anglo-Saxon to Norman hands. Indeed, the end of an era. 2 years later, in 1068, Edwin and Morcar led a revolt, supported by Gospatric, the Earl of Northumbria, stemming from grievances that included the unfulfilled marriage promise between Edwin and one of William's daughters. Also, the growing power of William Fitzosborne in Herefordshire, which impinged on Edwin's influence in his own earldom. William responded by marching through Edwin's lands, where he constructed Warwick Castle. Despite Edwin and Morcar's submission, William continued his campaign, constructing additional castles at York, Nottingham, Lincoln, Huntingdon, and Cambridge, placing trusted allies such as William Peveril and Henry de Beaumont in charge of these strategic sites. After solidifying his control, William returned to Normandy by the end of the year 1068. In the early days of 1069, Edgar the Atheling rebelled and seized York. Although William recaptured York and built another castle, Edwin remained at large, and later allied with King Sweyn of Denmark, whose fleet launched major assaults on various English cities, which included York, Exeter, and Shrewsbury. York eventually did fall to Edgar and Sweyn, and Edgar was briefly proclaimed king, until William mounted a swift counterattack, symbolically donning his crown amidst York's ruins on Christmas Day 1069. Then began negotiations with the Danes, and devastated the region up to the River Tees, driving Edgar into exile in Scotland. This phase of repression, known as the Harrying of the North, effectively ended resistance there by the April of 1070. Now, onto some church affairs of this time, because there was a few notable events. In 1070, church affairs saw William meeting with 3 papal legates, who ceremonially crowned him during Easter, signalling papal endorsement of his role. And this was indeed a big deal, having the papacy on your side. This was followed by significant ecclesiastical restructuring. At councils held near Easter and Whitsun, several English bishops and abbots were deposed, including the controversial Stigand. Lanfranc was appointed as the new Archbishop of Canterbury, and Thomas of Bayeux as the Archbishop of York. These councils marked the beginning of extensive replacements of English ecclesiastical leaders with Norman ones, dramatically altering the church's structure in England. William also founded Battle Abbey at the site of his victory over Harold, serving as both a penitential act and a kind of commemorative monument. It's still there today. It looks nice. Now, meanwhile, in the early days of 1070, Sweyn of Denmark, despite previous promises to leave, decided to return to England and joined up with Hereward the Wake at the Isle of Ely. Hereward's forces had previously captured and looted Peterborough Abbey. William managed to negotiate Sweyn's departure later that year, allowing him to address the revolt in Maine and the succession crisis in Flanders following the death of Count Baldwin VI in July of 1070. Richilda, Baldwin's widow, faced challenges from Baldwin's brother Robert, and initially sought an alliance through marriage to William Fitzosborne, who was killed at the Battle of Cassel in February 1071, leading to Robert's rise as count, and of course increasing tensions with King William. In 1071, William suppressed the last northern rebellion, constructing a causeway to reach the Isle of Ely, capturing Morcar, and facing the escape of Hereward. Earl Edwin was killed by his own men. Bad luck. William then turned to Scotland, defeating Malcolm and securing peace through the Treaty of Abernethy, which included Malcolm's son Duncan as a hostage, and the expulsion of Edgar the Aetheling from Malcolm's court. Returning then to Normandy in the early of 1073, William swiftly retook Le Mans from Fulk le Réchin of Anjou, consolidating his power in northern France. Despite these successes, the politics remained complex, with the new Count of Flanders hosting Edgar the Aetheling and forming new alliances against the Norman influence. William's governance over England proved to be stable enough for him to spend all of 1074 back in Normandy, leaving England under the administration of trusted lieutenants, for example, Richard Fitzgilbert and Lanfranc. Though in 1075, the Revolt of the Earls unfolded during William's absence. This rebellion was led by Ralph de Gale, Earl of Norfolk, and Roger de Bruttiol, Earl of Hereford. Ralph with strong connections to Brittany due to his heritage and lands there, married a relative of Roger at a wedding in Engsning, Suffolk, which served as the rebellion's catalyst. Ralph's dissatisfaction with his diminished authority compared to his predecessors likely fueled his participation. And Roger, though a Norman and the son of an influential William Fitzosborne, also found his authority reduced from his father's levels. The rebellion included Waltheof, Earl of Northumbria, one of William's previously favoured lords, and attracted support from some Breton lords as well. Ralph sought additional support by requesting aid from the Danish king, highlighting the seriousness of the threat. William managed the revolt from Normandy, relying on his representatives in England to suppress the uprising. Roger was confined by local efforts to Herefordshire, preventing from joining Ralph by Wulfstan, Bishop of Worcester, and Aethelwig, Abbot of Evesham. Meanwhile, Ralph was besieged in Norwich Castle by forces led by Odo of Bayeux, Geoffrey de Montbray, Richard Fitzgilbert, and William de Warenne. Eventually, Ralph fled to Brittany, leaving his wife all alone to surrender Norwich to William's forces. "I want a divorce." Well, the castle's garrison was allowed to leave for Brittany as part of the surrender terms, so it wasn't all that bad. Now, adding to all this complexity, the Danish king's brother, Knut, arrived with a substantial fleet, but his intervention came just a little bit too late to have any impact on the revolt's outcome. After a brief coastal raid, the Danish forces withdrew. William returned to England towards the end of 1075, focusing on securing the realm and managing the fallout of the rebellion. He left his wife, Matilda, in charge of Normandy. Celebrating Christmas in Winchester, he addressed the rebellion's consequences, detaining Roger and Waltheof. In 1076, Waltheof was executed. That's the end of him. Meanwhile, Ralph continued his resistance from Brittany, prompting William to return to the continent to address other challenges. In 1076, Earl Ralph de Gale, who had secured control of the castle at Dol in Brittany, became a focal point of contention. William advanced into Brittany in September and laid siege to the castle. However, King Philip I of France intervened, leading to William's defeat at the Battle of Dol, and that was William's first defeat ever. Can't win 'em all, as they say. Well, unless you're Alexander the Great. Well, despite this setback, William was able to retreat successfully to Normandy without significant long-term consequences, albeit pride a little damaged. Later that year, an Angevin attack on Maine was repelled, and Count Fulk le Rechine of Anjou was wounded during the unsuccessful assault. Another significant event occurred when Simon de Crepy, Count of Amiens, and a key ally of William, retired to a monastery and transferred his strategic county of the Vexin, a critical buffer between Normandy and the French royal land, to King Philip. This shift in allegiance presented new challenges to William, although he managed to negotiate peace with Philip in 1077 and a truce with Count Fulk shortly afterwards. The internal family dynamic within William's family began to deteriorate in late 1077, or perhaps the early 1078. Perhaps the cold was getting to them, particularly between William and his eldest son, Robert. Orderic Vitalis attributes the discord to a seemingly trivial quarrel involving Robert and his younger brothers, William, Rufus, and Henry, although it likely stemmed from deeper issues of inheritance and authority, as these things always do. Reportedly, Robert felt marginalized and had previously demanded control of Maine and Normandy, requests that were flatly denied. This familial strife led to Robert's departure from Normandy with a group of young nobles, who then engaged in raids against their own country from a base at Remoulade. After being driven out by William, they received shelter from King Philip at the castle of Gerberoi. In January of 1079, William besieged Gerberoi, where a dramatic confrontation occurred. During a sortie, Robert unhorsed, and he nearly killed his father, only stopped by the intervention of an Englishman, Toki, son of Wigod, who died protecting the king. The siege was ultimately unsuccessful, and by April of 1080, a reconciliation was achieved between William and Robert, reaffirming Robert's status as his father's heir in Normandy. Meanwhile, news of William's difficulties on the continent reverberated in England, inciting further challenges. In the same year of 1079, King Malcolm of Scotland conducted a devastating raid into northern England, exploiting the perceived weakness of Norman authority. This was followed in the spring of 1080 by a Northumbrian rebellion against Walcher, Bishop of Durham and Earl of Northumbria, and that resulted in Walcher's death. William sent his half-brother Odo to suppress the uprising by any means necessary. Later that year, William's son, Robert, led a punitive expedition into Scotland, forcing King Malcolm to terms and constructing new fortifications at Newcastle upon Tyne. William then spent Christmas 1080 in Gloucester, and Whitsun 1081 in Winchester, asserting his authority through ceremonial displays. It was during this period he also dealt with the papal request for fealty, which he rejected. In 1081, William conducted a campaign in Wales, reported by English sources as a military action, and by Welsh sources as simply a pilgrimage, likely aiming to consolidate Norman influence in the region. By the end of 1081, William returned to the continent to address disturbances in Maine, resulting in a negotiated settlement facilitated by a papal legatee. Between 1082 and 1084, the historical record regarding William's activities goes a little hazy. This generally indicates a period of relative quiet or unrecorded events, particularly given William's presence on the continent during this time, leaving a little less for the Anglo-Saxon chronicle to document. In 1082, William faced internal challenges, notably involving his half-brother Odo, the Bishop of Bayeux. The exact reasons for their conflict are a little bit of a mystery, as contemporary sources don't give us any detail of the cause. However, the chronicler Orderic Vitalis provides a later account, suggesting that Odo had harbored ambitions to become pope, and had even attempted to rally William's vassals for an invasion of southern Italy. Such actions represent a direct challenge to William's authority over his vassals, leading to Odo's arrest and subsequent confinement for the remainder of William's reign, though his lands were notably not seized. The following year, 1083, was marked by personal and political issues. William's son, Robert, initiated another rebellion, and this time he had support from the French king. Compounding these difficulties was the death of Queen Matilda on the 2nd of November 1083, a profound personal loss for William, who was known to have been particularly close to his wife. On 1084, tensions in Maine flared up again, with Hubert de Beaumont of Maine rebelling against William's authority. Hubert was besieged in his stronghold at Saint Suzanne. The siege extended over 2 long years, after which Hubert reconciled with William and was restored to favor, illustrating the ongoing unrest and William's effort to maintain control over his unstable territories. Now, during much of 1084, William's exact whereabouts remain a little uncertain, though he was documented in Normandy during Easter of that year. He may have travelled to England earlier to oversee the collection of the Danegeld. That's a tax levied to kind of fund defences against this potential invasion by King Knut of Denmark. The threat of Danish invasion loomed throughout 1085 into 1086, but the danger receded with Knut's death in July, alleviating the immediate threats to William's realm. Well, his strategy for consolidating his control over England prominently included the construction of numerous fortifications. The most iconic of these was the White Tower, the central keep of the Tower of London, which epitomized the Norman ability to fortify their presence in key locations. Initially, these castles were primarily earth and timber constructions, which were later rebuilt or replaced with more durable stone, much better to withstand sieges, but also the passage of time. The Norman approach to military organization marked a significant shift from Anglo-Saxon practices. Instead of relying on the local territorial units such as the Hyde, which was a land measure used for assessing taxes and military duties, William implemented a new system where his magnates were required to provide a fixed number of knights. These knights could be called upon for military campaigns and for manning castles, a process facilitated by the practice of sub-infeudation, where household knights gradually received lands in return for their service, leading to more feudal and hierarchical structured society. Now, these land grants were strategic and often designed to consolidate control around these castles, which served as administrative as well as military centers. These grants sometimes involved large swaths of land that had belonged to multiple Anglo-Saxon landholders, now reorganized to support a single Norman lord, enhancing both the defensibility and the manageability of these territories. But not all of the Normans were eager to accept these lands, reflecting the ongoing instability and the resistance faced from the native population. Over time, however, as William's control solidified, the original Anglo-Saxon aristocracy was largely displaced or simply absorbed into the new Norman ruling class. This transformation was not just characterized by the transfer of land, but also by the significant cultural and administrative changes. Additionally, William's personal passion for hunting influenced the landscape of England. He established the New Forest as a royal hunting ground by repurposing lands that were arguably poorly suited for agriculture, but historically significant for local communities. The actual extent of the depopulation caused by the creation of the New Forest is a matter of debate. Some modern studies do suggest that the impact might have been exaggerated by medieval chroniclers like William of Malmesbury. Regardless, the introduction of strict forest laws regulated hunting rights, reserving many privileges for the monarchy and further imposing Norman control over the social and natural environments of England. Well, following his campaigns in 1086, William returned to Normandy. He further solidified his alliances by marrying his daughter Constance to Duke Alan of Brittany. This was a strategic move aimed at strengthening his position against the French kings. Tensions continued with his son Robert, who, allied with the French king, was a constant source of rebellion and discord, and probably disappointment. This led William to lead a military expedition against the French Vexin in the July of 1087. During this campaign, while in the town of Mantes, William either fell ill or was severely injured by the pommel of his saddle. His condition worsened, and he was taken to the priory of Saint-Gervais in Rouen. As William lay there dying, the accounts of his final days vary significantly between sources. Orderic Vitalis provides a detailed and idealized account, rich with speeches that likely serve more to illustrate how a king's death should be portrayed, rather than factual events. Another account suggests its narrative might have been a rehashed version of earlier text, adjusted to fit William's story. Either way, it seems that these accounts are somewhat of a work of narrative fiction. But what we do know for sure is that on the 9th of September 1087, William died in Rouen. In his will, William divided his possessions among his sons. Normandy went to Robert. England was left in the hands of his second son, William Rufus, and his younger son Henry received a pretty decent sum of money. He also issued orders for the release of his prisoners, including his half-brother Odo, and made provisions for donations to the church and the poor. Of course, in the immediate aftermath of his death, there was complete disorder. Those present at his death quickly dispersed to secure their own interests. William's final resting place in Cannes was marked by a series of disturbances over many centuries. His tomb was first violated in 1522 under papal orders, and his body was placed back in the tomb intact. However, in 1562, during the French Wars of Religions, it was again desecrated. The bones were scattered and lost, save for one thigh bone. This relic was reinterred in 1642 beneath a new marker, which was replaced a century later by a more elaborate monument. This, however, was also destroyed during the French Revolution, and the current marble slab with its Latin inscription was placed in the early 19th century. And with that, we reach the end of our biography of William I, also known as William the Conqueror. I certainly hope that you've enjoyed it. I've certainly enjoyed reading it for you. Now, I would like to thank my top-tier patrons. That's Stark Factory, JC, Jeffrey, and Susan. Thank you for your contributions. And if you would like to make a contribution, you know what to do. Check out the Patreon link in the description. Until then, I wish you all the best. Thank you once more for listening. Good night, everyone.